Jesse in Washington.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, friends.
Hi. Oh, it sounds like you're coming in a little loud. Oh,
Okay. How am I sounding? Testing 1, 2.
sounds good. Yeah, it sounded like there was maybe a speaker that was playing the show that was getting picked up by the phone. There was some feedback, but it sounds like the feedback is gone.
Yeah. How are you guys today?
We're so good. What did you want to talk about?
Oh, just quickly, I wanted to say I'm glad to be on the line with you guys. You're two of my favorite hosts.
Thank you.
I was just watching this Sunday and caught you guys talking about something that was mildly interesting and just had to do with labels. It could be called rather nitpicky.
Okay.
It's just something I hear from a lot of internet atheists who I often agree with about a lot of stuff, but then it just seems nitpicky when you're talking about this and that label. It's not that important. I'm a secular non-cognitivist. I believe you said they're secular.
Theological non-cognitivist.
Yeah, it's a big word.
Yeah. It's just basically you just came down to, like, it's one of these labels you can tell somebody I'm a this or that and they still have no clue what you are or what you think about this or that. And it's just, I don't know, it doesn't move the conversation any. This is just a friendly criticism, you guys. I love you.
No worries.
Yeah.
So can I try and sum the statement up back to you?
Well, sure.
It sounds like you have a bit of a bone to pick when people use labels that don't necessarily help explain what they are.
Yeah.
I would agree, to be honest. I don't think, and I think if you go back and listen to what one of the things I said, I was really focusing on the ability to expand on that term, right? I think that's where the labels actually are valuable. It's not so much that somebody comes out and says, I'm an agnostic theist, right? That doesn't help us. What helps us is, here's what those words actually mean. Here's the meat of this sandwich here, right? If I just give you the top bun, it's like, well, that's great, man. That's delicious bread. It's really good brioche or whatever the hell it is, but it's not the whole rest of the sandwich. So yeah, and on that sense, Jesse, like, I'd agree if I just walked up to somebody and they were like, hey, I'm a Christian, and I was like, hey, I'm a theological non-cognitivist. Like, that'd be it. And that would suck. That would be stupid. That would be nothing, man. If, however, they come up and they say, hey, I'm a Christian, and I go, huh, what do you mean by that? And they go, well, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ's teachings as presented, in the Gospels, but I don't really focus so much on the Old Testament. It's like, oh, okay, now I have a better understanding, right? Just like if I say, hey, I'm a theological non-cognitivist, and somebody goes, oh God, what does that mean, SR? And I go, well, it kind of is getting at this idea that really, when we're talking about these concepts of gods and so forth, nobody seems to have a good enough understanding to make a lot of progress, From there, then it's like, oh, cool, now we can have a conversation. But yeah, you just throw out the label and, like, walk away as if that's a checkmate. Yeah, that's never going to work, man.
Yeah, it's kind of like that with everything, isn't it? With ask somebody and they're like, I'm a secular atheist or some shit, or a deistic atheist, or different flavors of atheist, or this or that. I'm different flavors of a rather absolute statement. It's just kind of silly to me.
Yeah. So, and I think there are two uses for it. One of them, I think, is what we tell people, which is, we best want to describe ourselves. But the other is, I find myself shying away from using the really, really big language unless someone is trying to flex their brain power. If somebody wants to use the big words and sound like they are more knowledgeable, then I kind of bring that up back to kind of go, calm down. But But
and I appreciate that about you, Eric. I always have, buddy.
Oh yeah, the thing.
I've been a fan of yours for years, man.
Hey, thank
all the
you.
way back to the Talkies days.
Hey,
glad to be on the line.
Yeah, the thing is, personally, I feel like if you know the topic well enough, you don't need to hide behind big language. Whenever I hear stuff by Jordan Peterson, he uses such flowery language that it definitely feels like he's trying to hide in obscurity. And
yes,
a lot of people who use those kind of big titles are trying to hide in obscurity and try and confuse people into going, oh, I'm maybe just not smart enough to understand it. But if you are using it to either explain yourself to somebody who understands what that is and you're trying to, get to better labels, fantastic. If you're trying to say, hey, calm the fuck down, I can use big words too, let's just focus on the topic, cool. But yeah,
put the thesaurus away, Jordan. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
But
those are all the uses I can think of, other than just. Yeah.
I'm with you. Oh, agnostic atheist. That's what I was trying to remember. That's what I hear all the time since for decades now. Since way back 100 years ago, watching freaking Matt Dillon talk about this or that. Agnostic atheist is just such a nonsense term to me. I'm an up and a down. I'm a black-white.
So that is if you have a very specific definition of agnosticism. When you're using the kind of Dawkins scale, kind of the way that they talk about Gnosticism and agnosticism, it just means whether you know or don't know, or you could be wrong, or all of that stuff. But yeah, that's why it helps to ask them, find out where they are first and then meet them there. But I'm right there with you. It can be
because we can have a conversation where we use two different definitions of a word, right? And still actually make progress in the conversation. We can have the conversation where I say, hey, when I mean atheist, I really just mean it in this broad, very simple understanding of believe in a God, do not believe in a God, right? But then somebody else could say, hey man, I understand that that's the definition you're using in this conversation, but when I use atheist, I mean it as strictly saying gods do not exist. In the philosophical literature, that's pretty much how it's used, and that's okay that that's the case, because Eric and I currently aren't writing a philosophy paper. We're having conversations with human beings, and so we get to go, hey man, we're not going to use that strict definition. We're going to use this definition over here, or vice versa. And again, just as long as we all know where we're coming from, we can actually still have the conversation, because now we just go, when Eric says atheist, this is what he's meaning. So here's how I can push back on this point or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it really is more valuable just to be like, what do you mean by that? Explain it to me like I'm 5, because you know what? I feel like I'm 5 about half the time. So,
but Jesse, if it makes you feel better, I'm going to challenge theological non-cognitivist after we end this call.
Oh no! Oh no!
And I'm not trying to back you guys up all day. I respect your right to have your own personal definitions for all the words. If you respect my right to roll my eyes a little bit, it's okay. I love you guys.
I seriously, being an atheist, and in this community, I feel like rolling your eyes is part and parcel with it. No, you're super good. You're super good. and don't ever think that I don't look back when I'm editing and go, oh God, I look like and sound like a smarmy son of a bitch. Like I do, I'm trying my best to be better, but is what it is.
I know you are, man. You're doing great. I just wanted to compliment you. You've gone so far since the Talk Even days. Good job, Eric, buddy.
Well,
you've loved to be. I say hi to everybody for me. Yeah, be good.
Will do. Take care. Thank you, Jesse.
All right.
Yeah.
Be good.
That was good. That was a good call.
Yeah. V is upstairs right now, sleeping in. And I'm very happy for them.
That's the best. Honestly, they got the best out of this deal between the three of us, right? Like, they're chilling, and here we are. I mean, God.
Hey, you know what? This fills me up in a way that I haven't gotten in a year. And so I'm definitely not not taking that for granted. Before we move on to the next caller, though, it feels like Atheo-Pagan weekend. It's amazing. We've got another caller. But before we move on, theological non-cognitivist. That sounds...
Eviscerate me, Eric. Take my whole worldview apart.
No. That sounds like my definition of agnostic.
Yeah, and I get that, and I don't think... so this is the thing about, I think, both theological non-cognitivism and agnosticism or igtheism. All of those terms inhabit a really similar space, and the differences between them are really, really nuanced. It's really more about like whether or not a belief can actually be formed in the brain on one side of it, and the other side of it is more about the semantics of it, and whether or not we truly have good enough definitions to make any progress.
Yeah.
I totally understand when somebody says, hey, that kind of sounds like the way I use agnosticism. And I don't really push back on that, because I think there is a great bit of overlap with all of these terms.
But I'm giving you the floor. I want to know, what's the nuance?
Well, I would say agnostic. So at least for me, when I'm using agnosticism, I really am thinking more in that sense about how we construct knowledge, and like that whole conversation, which isn't perfect either, right? Justified true belief is a it's a good little kind of guidepost, but in and of itself isn't perfect. There's all the Gettier problems, of course. There's so much philosophical literature on this.
I'm right there with you, by the way. JTB is broken. I definitely don't.
It is, but it is kind of a decent way to at least begin your understanding of it, right? And so for me, when I say agnosticism, I'm specifically thinking about it in that sense. Do we have this ability to know? Whereas theological non-cognitivism or agnosticism isn't really talking about whether we have the ability to understand. It's not about whether we can get the knowledge necessarily. It's more talking about the current state of existence, and trying to say more in the sense of, at this point in time, when we use the word God, when we say the term supernatural, because of the fact that it is so ambiguous for so many people, that when we're having these conversations, we're not actually even conceptualizing the same thing at all. And so before we can move forward into this conversation of, is it real? Is it not real? Is there value in following these, dictates and guidelines that this thing created and whatnot? We actually have to nail down a much better understanding. Like when we use the word cup, it doesn't exactly give us this 100% we know everything that is and is not a cup, but we have a much better grasp of cup and wheel and table than we do when it comes to soul or magic. And that ambiguity in soul and magic is so much that we really don't even know what we're talking about. Does that at least make a distinction for you between the way that I'm seeing the terms?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely it does.
Okay.
I just, to put on the hat and challenge it, even though I'm not necessarily...
Yeah, please.
If I were to ask someone you went to high school with to describe Eliot, and I asked your parents to describe Eliot, and I asked your neighbors to describe Eliot, the people that they would describe would be very different from each other, even though they're still describing you. And asking them to describe you as a person is a more complex and nuanced thing than describing a cup, or a jacket or whatever. And because of that, I don't know, I feel like when people say, oh, everybody has their own definition of a God, this is true. But if you're all going to the same church, there are enough similarities there that I can get the general idea, and I don't feel bad about addressing those larger brush strokes to completely go, that God doesn't exist. You know what I mean?
Yes, totally. And I agree with you. And there are certain conceptions that absolutely are defined enough, or at least have enough characteristics ascribed to them for this conception of a deity, that I think it is fair to say, the idea that we're super ambiguous on this version isn't really the case, right? oftentimes whenever I'm discussing, these particular understandings, as opposed to just saying, atheist, because I am actually a more hard atheist than a lot of individuals, I do take the stance that, like, every God I've ever come across does not exist. I think there's a flaw in some area of it. But oftentimes somebody will say, a religious person in that moment will say, hey, but couldn't there be a version out there that you just haven't come across yet that doesn't have those problems, that doesn't have the inconsistencies or the lack of evidence? And I say, yeah, maybe it could be the case, but that's where I say I feel that description for that version of a deity, I have no idea what the fuck people are talking about there. And it's like, man, we really got to make some more progress on defining it before we can move forward. But the majority of them, I mean, the Quranic God, the Old Testament God, the New Testament God, BS, all fake, all not real. I feel comfortable with that. I have enough understanding there. It really is something that's this very small sliver of this conversation, I feel like, like when somebody just wants to push you as far as they can to say, like, well, couldn't there be something, man, like a force, like,
Absolutely. I don't know. I think, let me chew on that for a bit. We might have more of this conversation.
Push back some more. Yeah.